Please subscribe and hit the like button.
Well, good evening. Welcome to Yada Yahweh Radio here with Kirk this evening. And Kirk, before we got on the air, I had shared that I came up with something today that was one of those days that you just your eyes go big and wide, and you say, oh my, this has been there all the time, and I'm just now stumbling upon it. So I'd like to actually begin today by sharing something that I wrote today, and then we'll go from there back into, we were going through Yada Yahweh, and we're just beginning the Isha woman chapter of Yada Yahweh. So today I'm rewriting the 11th chapter of the second volume of Questioning Paul. The first volume, or the rewrite of the first volume of Questioning Paul, is now available at Amazon. It's got a cover that Jackie found of a wolf in sheep's clothing. It's called Liar's Lie. It's got a lot of new material in it. It looks beautiful in the new dress. And also, in addition to that, we've got the third book of Yada Yahweh, Volume 3, which is called In the Covenant. It follows in the beginning the story of man, and then in the covenant. So we have 3 volumes now of Yada Yahweh and one now of Questioning Paul. I think it's the 12th book that we now have completed in the rewrite. Wow. And as I say, I'm in the last chapter of Volume 2, which then will be ready in probably a little over a week at Amazon. So normally I would finish the chapter in a day, but this chapter, I'm now on my 3rd day on it, and it'll have another day, and then I'll end up having to write probably another 30 or 40 pages in Volume 4 based on what I learned. So I finished with the translation. Here's the lead-in. Having dismissed the Torah and its covenant, there is no longer any merit to circumcision, according to Paul, which Yahweh had stated was an everlasting sign of his eternal covenant. And therefore, the Nestle Allen, I use the Nestle Allen along with the King James and the New Living Translation throughout Questioning Paul, in addition to my own translation, because the Nestle Allen, it is the interlinear that's associated. It's probably the most scholastic, most literal rendering of anything in the Christian New Testament. And so, as bad as Paul writes, as illiterate as he is, it's nice to have a scholastic tool that reads as he wrote it, so that people don't look at my translations and say, well, that doesn't flow very well. Well, it doesn't flow very well because Paul doesn't write very well.
Flow very well.
Okay, so here's the Nestle Allen literal translation. It says, as many as for unto Christ were immersed, Christ put on. Now, documented more comprehensively, this becomes, and I have to tell you, it's very sad, and I apologize for this, but I actually now understand Paul speak. So when Paul writes something, I understand what he's trying to say. That's embarrassing to admit, but it is nonetheless true. All right, this is what Paul wrote. This is my translation of it. Because as many as to Christo, you all were actually at some point baptized. Christone, you all clothed or plunged. And it probably should be you, even though he didn't have his tenses correctly. Let's just help him a little bit here. You were all clothed or plunged. Baptizomai is the word that Paul chose. Now, it struck me that this was probably the first time in Christendom that the concept of baptism had ever been spoken of. Now, if you're reading your Christian New Testament, you would think that because you'll find it mentioned with John the Baptist in Matthew.
Yeah.
You'll find John the Baptist in Mark. You'll find John the Baptist in Luke. Oh my! Luke turns John the Baptist into the most elaborate fairy tale you ever heard. I mean, his entire first chapter is on the miraculous signs and wonders of John the Baptist. He is the second coming of Elijah. He has a prophetic declaration from Gabriel. Oh, and when his mommy and the mommy of Jesus met, little John the Baptist, he leapt in his womb. It is so sweet. Of course, it's all nonsense. And then there, of course, is the conflicting account in the Gospel of John. Because in the Gospel of John, John is not called a Baptist. In addition to that, guess who is not baptized?
Jews?
Jebus. Not even baptized. So, I had thought that even though his baptism is mentioned in Mark, that this was the first time baptism was ever associated with the new religion of Christianity. Turns out I was not only right, but what my wife found. Because I said, this is my instinct. My instinct tells me here that not only was this the first time that baptism was ever associated with the religion of Christianity, and that Paul is doing it because he wants to annul circumcision as the sign of the covenant, but there was a pervasive, well-known religious entity celebrating the rite of baptism in Israel at the time that this moron copied. Could you find it for me? I just know it's there. Oh. It isn't just there. Christianity is based on it. It is the most amazing thing that I think we have ever stumbled into. So let me read what I wrote, and we'll go from there. I'm not going to get into all of it, but I do want to share some of it with you because it is so earth-shaking. There is no purpose or benefit to baptism. Bold statement. There is no purpose or benefit to baptism. According to God, and he ought to know, there is no association between baptism and participation in the covenant. Entry into heaven, the remission of sin, or salvation. It is among the pagan practices Yahweh asked us to avoid. If baptism had a counterpart in the Torah, Nabi, wa Mizmor, it would have had a Hebrew equivalent. But there is no such word or concept in the language God used to convey his message to the world. Yahweh asks us all to wash our hands. Parents do that to their children regularly, don't they? And while in the wilderness, he asked those entering his tabernacle to wash their hands and their feet.
Yes.
And in the mode of a caring father, he instructs us to wash our clothes at appropriate times, especially when around contagious individuals. Whereas we know he also encourages us to wear face masks.
Yes.
These references to cleansing are about hygiene and are never presented as a substitute for circumcision. Baptism has become Christianity's signature rite. It is used instead of circumcision to demonstrate admission and acceptance. And it was introduced into the religion for the first time with these words from Paul's pen. The Greek word baptizo was in common use when it was first penned by Paul in Galatians, and therefore by Mark, Paul's associate. Before we consider its religious and etymological history, however, I would like to demonstrate how Paul used Mark to promote his agenda, so that we properly credit baptism's synchronization into Christianity to Paul and to Galatians 3:27. Our quest to know John, who was called Mark, begins in Acts 12:12, where Shimon Kephesh, Peter, is shown visiting with him after a malach, a spiritual messenger, freed the disciple from Herod's custody. However, Shaul absconds with him immediately thereafter in Acts 13:5, making Mark part of the impostor's posse by Acts 13:13. When we next see Mark, it is in Acts 15:37 through 39, where the aspiring gospel writer was wavering and ready to take leave of Paul, along with Barnabas, who happened to be his cousin. But Paul kept insisting otherwise, that actually his nephew. No, I guess cousins. They were cousins. Cousins are cousins both ways. But Paul kept insisting otherwise, that those who had deserted him not take him. This is a direct quote. But Paul kept insisting otherwise, that those who had deserted him, Barnabas, not take Mark. And there arose this is again a quotation from the book of the Acts of Paul, and there arose such a sharp disagreement that they separated from one another, and Barnabas took Mark with him and sailed away. Paul, however, did not handle desertion well, especially since Mark and Peter, Paul's nemesis, had become friends. The trail runs through Colossians 4:10 and 11, where we find that Paul prevailed and once again had Mark back in his clutches, wrenching him away from Peter and Barnabas. In his letter to the Colossians, we find Paul saying, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, sends you his greetings, and Barnabas' cousin Mark, about whom you received instructions, if he comes to you. About whom you received instructions, if he comes to you. Welcome him. And Iusu, who is called Justus. These are the only fellow workers for the kingdom of God who are from the circumcision, and they have proved to be very valuable to me. In Philemon 24, Mark is listed along with Luke as my fellow workers. But this leads to 2 Timothy 4:10 and 11, where in the last words Paul would write in his final letter, he says, alone, only Luke, is with me. Mark has been taken, carried off, and led away. Bring him with you, because he is useful to me, highly serviceable, and very profitable, exceedingly easy to make use of, for the purpose of my ministry, for the purpose of my preparations, following my commands. Oh my, how is it that we've missed this all this time? Mark was co-opted under very sinister circumstances to serve Paul. Yeah. The word translated useful, eucharistos, is a compound of eu, meaning good, prosperous, and well, as in to be well off, doing well, and well done, as well as beneficial. And Christos, suitable and eternally useful, fitting for service and beneficial. Christos is a spelling variant of Christus, the title the earliest text attribute to Yosha and his followers instead of Christos, drugged. It was unappealing, however, to Greeks and Romans because Christus was commonly used as a nickname for their slaves. Diakonai, the word translated my ministry, is used 34 times in the Christian New Testament, all by Paul and pals. Acts 8 times, Romans 4 times, 1 Corinthians twice, 2 Corinthians 10 times. It serves to encapsulate Shaul's mission and is synonymous with Pauline doctrine. It is from diakonos, raising dust, as in moving around in a hurry. And indeed, Paul used Mark to kick up considerable dust, writing the gospel according to Paul, which is known in Mark. And Mark became the basis of Luke, and 98% of Mark is found in Matthew. And that is why they are all anti-Semitic and reflect Paul's sentiments. It is why Paul did not quote from any of them, because Mark and then Luke wrote their Gospels, and the Acts of Paul per Shaul's directions immediately after his death. Matthew would follow by plagiarizing Mark and Luke some 30 years thereafter. It is surprisingly common for men to swoon at the feet of psychopaths. Now that we know that Mark's Gospel was written a decade or two after Galatians, and that was done at Paul's direction, let's see if we can ascertain where Paul pilfered the concept of baptism. That answer, while readily available, it's embarrassing. It's used in the Sibylline oracles. You'll find line 160 to 166, as Book 1 say, O ye miserable mortals, repent, baptize in living streams your entire frame with its burden of sin. Lift up to heaven your hands in prayer for forgiveness and cure yourselves of the impiety by the fear of God.
Wow, right out of the Christian
where he pilfered the concept. Wow. This explains Mark's furious presentation of John the Baptist, which is the corruption of the consultation of Yeshaya, Isaiah, Malachi, and Shemot, Exodus, and it reads eerily similar to the Sibylline oracle account. Luke then begins his gospel by embellishing Mark's dubious account with the absurd claim that John's birth was miraculous and even foretold by the angel Gabriel to Zechariah, who claims that he will come in the spirit and power of Elijah, of course, to scold the Israelites. Then to buff the divine varnish, Zechariah's wife, Elizabeth, is allegedly a daughter of Aaron and, of course, a relative of Mary. Pregnant at the same time, it came about that when Elizabeth heard Mary's greetings, the baby leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. And she cried out in a loud voice, "Blessed among women, blessed is the fruit of your womb." Luke 1:40-42. While continuing to wax poetic for a considerable time, when it finally comes to presenting the fanciful tale of John the Baptist, Luke cites the account Mark had written at Paul's behest. Matthew's account is also derived from, but when we turn to the disciple Yahowah and John, after his famous "in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God," he transitions to John, saying that he bore witness of him. Curiously, however, there's no mention of John being the Baptist, nor of him baptizing Jesus. The only use of baptismo is in the mouths of the Pharisees. The reason for all of this fuss is that without the invention of John the Baptist baptizing Jesus, there is no justification for the Christian rite. Moreover, apart from this fabrication, there is no other reference to Jesus being anointed with the dove, and thus being the Messiah. It is also the only time that Jesus is referred to as the Son by God. Putting the concept of baptizo in the mouths of Jewish leaders is also telling. Turns out that a Jewish religious sect composed the Sibylline Oracles, not only introducing the concept of baptism for the remission of sin, but also a plethora of other religious concepts that were incorporated into Paul's letter. There is so much to them. They are so indicting of Paul. I'm going to detail the connection between the Sibylline Oracles, Jewish philosophy, Pauline doctrine, and Christianity, and what will become Volume 4 of Questioning Paul. It is breathtaking. It is absolutely breathtaking. I mean, the crucifixion scene all came from the Sibylline Oracles. John the Baptist, same thing. You just, every place you look, and there was some notable line or some notable event, pilfered. I mean, I am so glad that we found Mizmor 22 and 88, which provide an eyewitness account of what happened when Yosha, as the Passover lamb, fulfilled the Mikra, because the Sibylline Oracles absolutely render Christendom a complete and utter farce. Now, what is important is that we recognize that Galatians 3:27 is the first time that the pagan practice of baptism was presented in conjunction with Christianity. Second, there is no basis for baptism in the Torah, although the religious rite was widely known to Jews as a result of their Sibylline Oracles, which were exceedingly popular at this time. Third, Yosha, Jesus, was not baptized. Fourth, the legend of John the Baptist was composed by Luke and is a fairy tale. Fifth, Yosha, Jesus, never baptized anyone, including his disciples. Sixth, apart from Yahowah and John and him attributing the concept of baptisma to the religious Jews, something that the Sibylline Oracles affirm, every other mention of baptism in the Christian New Testament was instigated by Paul, beginning with his associate, Mark, and then Luke. And seventh, the Sibylline Oracles were instrumental to Paul as he sought to distinguish his new faith from Yahweh's Torah. Baptism is just the beginning. When comparing the Gospels to the Oracles, there are so many common threads. Even I was shocked. Now there's more to it, but I just wanted to throw that out for today because talk about controversial. It is a gold mine. It is going to be one of the most challenging things I've done is to step aside from the Sibylline Oracles and the amount that they were plagiarized into the Christian Gospels and to Paul's letters. Because I've still got to finish Volume 3, because Volume 4 of Questioning Paul is going to be some of the things we learned about the history of, remember I shared a number of things in the book of Matthew and how it came into being and why it became anti-Semitic. And then I had the whole story of Paul's first speech where everything he said was a lie. And then we have the history of Christian translations, as well as the history of how the books like Matthew, for example, got finished by Eusebius during the time of Constantine, and how there's no prior history of any of the anti-Semitic comments prior to that time. So it's a really interesting study, and we're going to put all of that new material that we came across after completing Questioning Paul in Volume 4. So it's going to go from 1 volume to 4 volumes, with the first volume done. The second volume, well, if it wasn't for the Sibylline Oracles and baptism, would have been done today, but it'll take a little time now to get through the final bit of it. But oh my goodness, I just knew it had to be the case. And, so many of my Christian friends that in the early days that I was writing with and finally had to abandon,
Yes.
they were always saying, well, that baptism is a sign of the covenant, just like circumcision, and both have their symbolism. No, there is nothing in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms even remotely related to baptism. It's purely pagan. So how about those apples?
I'm sitting here stunned. I mean, I didn't know you could find more stuff. But wow. It totally makes sense.
It is. It's pretty.
Wow.
It's pretty astonishing when you have to when you work it all through. It's pretty effective. This is the new introduction. I guess it's now chapter 12 of volume 2. It's called The Middleman. The Middleman. Would you believe?
Yeah.
It begins. Paul calls himself the middleman. His frayed emotions spent, Paul continued to flail in the air, taking sweeping swipes at God. Having not landed a solid blow, he became a tragic figure, tangled up in his own pathetic flailing. He was a punch-drunk boxer, tottering in the midst of his tantrum, fueled only by ego and desperate to land the haymaker he craved. His vendetta against the Almighty evolved into madness. He continued to tamper with the evidence and bellow bombastic taunts as he mocked everyone, including God. And yet, through it all, completely detached from reality, he had become the high-minded moral failure Yahowah had foretold 666 years earlier. Reflecting his Lord's overbearing attitude, Shaul continued to present his attack on the Almighty as if he were a beacon of light in a dark world. The bad seed of Abraham was insane, and yet with every breath, this lowly and little man would have us believe that he alone was imbued with the means to save mankind. This would be his haunting refrain. God is wrong, Paul is right. Jews are bad, Gentiles are mine. God is wrong, Paul is right. Jews are bad, Gentiles are mine. That's the opening of chapter 12. I am, admittedly, not a fan of Paul, and no. I cop an attitude. I love Yahowah. We are friends. I respect him. I love him. I admire him. I enjoy his company, and the likes of Paul really piss me off. That is just the way it is. I despise him, and so I am not an impartial witness. All right.
Wow.
That off my chest.
No, that's good. That's good stuff. Are you kidding?
Wow. It is pretty amazing. And it's to me it has been actually a labor of love to go back into questioning Paul and to excoriate him. Yeah. All right, we're going to turn now to volume 2. It's called Adam, the Story of Man. Fourth chapter is Isha, the woman.
Third chapter.
Actually, the fourth of that
it's now
book.
The fourth. Oh,
yeah,
I got my old record. Okay.
Yeah, I'll have to send you an update because I think the previous chapter became like 100 and some odd pages, and so I divided.
Oh, you broke it in half.
Yeah, I broke it.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's called So Much to Learn. There is a reason for everything. Good and bad, right and wrong, life and death. Our choices matter. There is always a consequence. In this regard, Yahweh not only wants us to know that he created evil, it is right here in the Torah that he explains why. One cannot choose good if bad does not exist. And for this choice to be credible, an adversary must be its champion. If everything were wonderful, if all of life were sunshine, there would be no reason to reject Yah or separate oneself from his love. Halel, which is sometimes written Halal, Ben Shakar, better known as Satan, is a spiritual being created by God. He was part of the Sabbath, the vast array of spiritual implements. Yahweh calls them malach, or messengers. He deploys them on man's behalf. And as we move out of Bereshith, Genesis, and the Torah, and into Yashaya, Isaiah, and the prophets, and we discover that this adversarial being wanted to be considered above the Most High, and thus perceived as if he were God. And while few things are as insightful, that is less important now than what and why he was allowed into the garden. But just think of that for a moment. That's the thing that everyone who is religious gets wrong about Hasatan, the adversary. They think that Satan worshipers, oh, they're the bad ones. Yeah, I don't want to be around those Satan worshipers.
No.
Satan despises Satan worshipers. Absolutely despises. The last thing that Satan wants is to be worshipped as the adversary. It's as clear as the noses on our face. Satan wants to be worshipped as if he were God. And so any reference to him as Hasatan, the adversary, he wants to reject. And so when you read an attack on Satan in Christianity or in Islam, it's because Satan despises that title. He doesn't want to be the adversary. He wants to be God. And when you recognize that, what you find is that Satan is the God, the Lord of Christianity, the Lord of Islam, the Hashem of Judaism. It's an exceedingly important point to draw home. Eden's transition from good to bad was very abrupt. And since context is the key to understanding, it's probably wise that we reassessed how we got to this place. And these are the statements regarding the garden and the creation of Adam and Towrah that we had considered previously, which is bringing up to the time we are now. Yahweh Almighty relationally selected and grasped hold of the man named Adam, and he settled him in the Garden of Eden to minister to her and to closely observe her, closely examining and carefully considering it. Bereshith, Genesis 2:15. That tells you, A, that man was outside of the garden. That a man was taken from outside of the garden and placed into the garden. And that man had a job to do. Yahweh loves work. To minister to her and closely observe her. God wanted man to observe life in the garden and then interact with him. Tells you what our purpose is going to be in eternity. Pay attention. Then Yahweh Almighty provided direction concerning and on behalf of Adam the man. Oh, well, we have Torah already. What is Torah? Instruction and direction.
Guidance. Yeah.
Yahweh Almighty provided direction, instruction concerning and on behalf of Adam, the man, saying, from every tree in the garden, you can continually eat, enthusiastically being fed and nurtured. Is there a restriction there?
No, sir.
From every tree in the garden, every single one of them, You can eat enthusiastically and be nurtured. No restrictions of any kind. But, listen carefully, but from the tree of the knowledge of good, that which is beneficial and productive, correct and proper, favorable and enjoyable, moral and right, valuable and worthy, and also bad, that which was ineffective, counterproductive, errant and improper, disadvantageous and undesirable, disagreeable and immoral, both wrong and worthless, even restrictive. Do not make a habit of continuing to eat from it, because as a consequence, within a day, you will absolutely die, defined by having eaten from it, coming to resemble what you have consumed. So, you can even eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad.
Yeah, you've got free will.
Yep, and you can eat from it regularly. Written in the imperfect. But there's a consequence. You can eat from it, free to do so. Consequence. Eat from it, you're going to die. And you're going to be defined as having eaten from it. We know that because of the way the verb was written. It was a verbal adjective, meaning that Adam is going to come to resemble the action of the verb, which is to die. Mm-hmm. You're going to die resembling it. You're going to come to know what it means to die. Yahweh Almighty said. Now this is the next line. So, okay, there's the instruction. Eat whatever you want. Understand, though, that there's one tree. The eat of it is going to be a negative consequence. Your choice. Yahweh Almighty said, it's not good, not productive or beneficial for the man, Adam, representing mankind created in God's image, to exist alone or to be by himself. Now, isn't that insightful? God knows what the governors in blue states like California and Michigan can't figure out. That isolated, man's in real trouble. He becomes abusive.
Oh, boy.
He becomes paranoid. In fact, he becomes suicidal. Suicide rates are way up. Spousal abuse, way up. Alcohol abuse, way up. Psychiatric problems, way up. Drug abuse, way up. Man does not function well alone. God says, big surprise here, man does not function well alone. We just don't. Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm an extrovert. I'm an extrovert because I didn't like being an introvert. I was born an introvert. And I'm here to tell you, if you don't like what you are, you can change.
Change it?
You can. I was born an introvert, and I didn't like it. You know why I didn't like being an introvert? The number one reason?
Girls.
Yes, absolutely true. I thought girls were really pretty. I have to tell you, I like girls. I was too shy to walk up.
I will overcome this.
I will overcome this. Girls are worth me overcoming this. And that was my motivation. Same motivation old Adam had here. Girls are pretty. I don't want to be an introvert. But man is a social creature. It's not good or productive, beneficial for man to be alone. So God says, I'm going to engage, and I'm going to continually act on his behalf, producing a helper and supporter, one who assists and serves as a positive influence, who rescues and renews life. His corresponding counterpart, describing that which is straightforward and right for him, open to him, close by, in his immediate proximity. Pretty cool. So then Yahweh Almighty, who fashioned and formed man out of the elements of the earth, and every living creature and animal of the expansive environment, in addition to every bird of the sky, brought them to Adam to witness and delight in what he would call them and how he would greet and welcome them, even if he would summon them and invite them to meet with him, approaching them. So insightful here. So God didn't start with woman.
No.
Although
it is
first. Almost certain that woman and man, without an asama, were present among all of the life forms that God brought out of the area that extended beyond the garden, that he brought to Adam to see how he would interact with them. And so God, so if you look at what God was interested in, God's interest is in this relationship he had with Adam. And because he is concerned about Adam, he wants Adam happy. He wants Adam to be, he's concerned about Adam's well-being. And he knows that Adam needs company. Now, I'm here to tell you that I happen to be a big fan of dogs. And there is something about having a dog as company that I find very satisfying. But I will tell you that my dog is not nearly as satisfying as my wife. So I understand why I would say, let's try them all out. See what you like, how you interact with them. Yahweh's very, very proud of life. And it should be. DNA is a superlative programming language, and there's so many interesting variations. And the functionality of life, from the way that smell and sight and taste, feeling, all work, and hearing, and then the process of us being aware of our environment and being able to respond to it and interact and communicate. Oh, what a marvelous thing. So Yahweh wanted to celebrate life with Adam and to see if there was a life form that Adam might relate to and say, hey, this would be good. Got nothing against having a pet platypus. Why not? Could be fun. I once had a pet sloth. It was pretty cool.
Did you really?
I did. Yeah, I did have a pet sloth.
Wow.
I was in the Amazon at the time, so it worked out well for the sloth and well for me. So, therefore, for the benefit of the relationship and to reveal the proper path to walk to get the most out of life, everything Adam approached and welcomed and encountered, designating by name, that became the depiction and reputation of that living soul and conscious life form. Adam summoned and met with, reading by their proper designation, all of the animals, the birds of the sky, every conscious life form of the expansive environment. Guess what that had to include?
Human beings.
Neanderthal,
if they're there too. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
Homo sapiens.
But there was not found for Adam a helper and supporter, one who could assist and serve alongside, similar to or right for him. You know, if you don't have a conscience, if you don't have this ability to differentiate between right and wrong, if you can't make good judgments, you're just boring compared to someone who had that capacity, which Adam did. Yeah. As a result, Yahweh Almighty caused the man Adam to be anesthetized. So God said, man can't be alone. I'm going to try every life form I've created, and we're going to have this great fun doing this. And then Yahweh said, I realized that there weren't any that were right for him. God said, I'm going to take care of that. I'm going to create a companion for it. Now, God at this point had a couple of options. One is, God could preoccupy all of Adam's time. If he was never alone, always with God, he would not. There would be no issue with the social deprivation with it. But would it be maybe a little much for both Yahweh and for Adam to have the relationship 24/7? What happened with the children of Israel once they, Yahweh freed them from the crucibles of Egypt and was talking to them as they burning fire on the top of the mountain with his booming voice?
Yeah, they were overwhelmed.
Yeah, they were overwhelmed. They said, please don't do that anymore. It's just way too overwhelming. God, if you're as diminished as we are from God presently, 24/7 unfiltered God, that might be a little much. I'd like to try it, but we have some examples here where God's saying, no, that's a little much for it. That's why by the time we get to, we are so close that we sit down next to one another. We go and explore the universe together. That we are buddy and father son, and we get the full McGillicuddy. By that time, Yahweh's going to have elevated us, enriched and empowered and liberated us,
yes,
enlightened us to the point that we're operating in 7 dimensions. We are infinity times infinity times infinity times infinity greater than we are now. And so, not a big deal then. The difference between us and God will be actually quite small by God's own design, where now it is quite considerable.
Massive.
But, so that would be one option, is God could be 24/7, I'm with Adam, and God says, that's probably not a good action. The second is he could expose Adam to find him a pet kangaroo or orangutan or something that could be buddy, and that didn't work either. So the third was, I can just let the man go crazy and spend time with him when I want to, but boy, that's not going to work out for him much, because in the time that I'm away from him, he is going to go nuts. So God said, I think what I want to do is that I want to create a woman. And I was just working on the translation. Paul's next statement is that there is no distinction between no longer men and women, no distinction also between Jews and Hellenes, Greeks. And of course, with Yahweh, there's a tremendous distinction. We Goyim are only associated with Yahweh when we are part of Yisrael's world. We have to embrace what God intended for Yisrael to be part of his family. So we're nothing without Yisrael. Yisrael and Yahudah is everything to God, and they remain so to the very end. But also there's a tremendous difference between men and women, particularly on the issue of circumcision. Women aren't circumcised, men are. But I understand that Paul liked little boys. As for me, as I told you, I overcame shyness because I think girls are pretty. I like girls. And no offense, Kirk, you're a nice guy, but guys got to have a Now, the fact of the matter is that together there's synergism. We are better together. Much better together. It's not only pleasurable, but beneficial. And so God created a woman to be the perfect companion for man. By doing so, God did something really extraordinary. And what he did is gave man the opportunity to say, hey, God, fuck off. I dig the woman. And so when Adam wanted to spend time with God now, it was by choice, because he had a really fun, really enjoyable, stimulating option back there in the in wherever they nested in the garden. So that meant the choice to be with Yahweh, real, genuine, powerful.
Quite an insight.
What God, what God did, and that just shows you how spectacular Yahweh is, how comfortable Yahweh is with himself. Is not only is he not commanding that we follow his orders, he's saying, I'm going to give you a setup where if you want to ignore me, go right ahead. I'm going to make it easy for you. And if you choose to embrace me, well, I'm going to make that wonderful for you. So, he said, as a result, the Almighty caused the man Adam to be anesthetized, falling deeply asleep, similar to being under anesthesia. And while he slept, he grasped hold of one of his ribs from his side and sutured up the place beneath it, replacing it with living tissue. Then Yahweh Almighty constructed with the rib, building for the purpose of the family and procreation, establishing also for restoration that which to reveal the benefits of the relationship he had taken from the man, a woman for a wife. And he brought her to the man. Now, I would have said, yowza, that is really, really neat. But either Adam was a lot more articulate, or God helped him out so that we might understand the consequence of all of this. Then Adam responded. This is the way to conduct one's life. The motivation to push forward. And the persistent heartbeat of life. Its essential nature, out of my essence. A living being to communicate intelligently. For me to desire and to share positive thoughts. For this reason she shall be greeted and welcomed, called woman, because out of man she was taken.
That's some highfalutin pillow talk, ain't it?
Oh, man, isn't that brilliant? This is the way to conduct one's life. I would agree with that. The motivation to push forward and the persistent heartbeat of life? Yes.
Yeah.
Its essential nature, out of my essence, a living being able to communicate intelligently, for me to desire and share positive thoughts. That's the best it can be. You know, I'm fortunate to say I'm enjoying everything that he just wrote. For this reason, she shall be greeted and welcomed as woman, because out of man she was taken. Accordingly, therefore, a man shall leave his father and his mother and engage, becoming close with his woman. And they shall exist as a unified pronouncement regarding life and an uplifting declaration concerning living in the flesh. And the two, the man and his woman, were naked. And they were not ashamed. It wasn't wrong. They weren't bothered by it. Well, that's quite an attack on Christianity, isn't it? Because Christianity, Pauline doctrine, the flesh is evil. And God said, no, they were right there naked, and it was good.
Yeah. Good old time.
Yeah, God said it's good. In fact, wouldn't it be just sadistic of God to create, I don't see, frankly, what women see in men, but I know the attractiveness and the beauty of a woman. For God to say, hey, guy, I created this, but you can't have it. You can look, but you can't touch. I mean, what a sadistic way to go about it. No, God said, it's beautiful, it's fun, enjoy. He never once says you shouldn't be a sexual creature. I mean, his limitations on sexuality are so de minimis. Incest is really bad. Pedophilia is really bad. Rape is really bad. And don't take advantage sexually of a man when he's down. That's it. No sheepies, no sons and daughters, no moms and dads. I mean, this is pretty basic stuff, right? Rape's really terrible. Pretty basic. Therefore, Yahweh selected Adam and placed him inside of the Garden of Eden, such that he could consider it and care for it. Along the way, God provided instructions telling Adam that he could eat whatever he desired. He explicitly explained, however, that there would be a self-defining and deadly consequence of continuing to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Therefore, Yahweh announced that since it was not good for man to be alone, he would engage on Adam's behalf, assisting, helping, and supporting him. Initially, God did so by introducing man to other life forms that he had created, realizing that it would be a mutually enjoyable and enriching experience for them to share that together. However, since that ultimately proved inadequate, God created woman, the ideal companion, and brought her to the man. Adam demonstrated his appreciation and his linguistic aptitude, exuberantly and brilliantly encapsulating Yahweh's intent. The scene was even portrayed as sensual and uplifting. Now, in contrast to this is where we branch off into new material.
Mm-hmm.
Spellbinding serpent, Waha Nakash. So then the sorcerous snake, this venomous viper and poisonous cold-blooded reptile, this tempting and toxic creature from Nakash, the one who enchants and captivates regarding the divine, the one who practices divination, magic, and sorcery, and who indulges in prophecy to capitalize by fortune-telling, invoking supernatural knowledge and power, was clever and cunning. Arum, shrewd and subtle, appearing sensible, crafty, and obscuring, elusive and ambiguous with his counsel. More so than any other life form, Chaya, relative to Asher, the broad and open way, Sedeh, that Yahweh Almighty had deployed. Then he said to the woman, Isha, this is Satan's first line, so what if it were true that God said you should not make a habit of eating from any tree in the garden? Isn't that clever? So what if it were true? So
Sound like
what
a
if
lawyer.
it were true? Isn't that interesting? So what if it were true? Beyond all of this, even more than this, in contrast, and on the other hand, nevertheless, upon the condition, therefore, that it was out of anger, furthermore, demonstrating resentment and arrogance, but then inappropriate self-appraisal, while emphasizing that it was indeed accurate, that there was an exception. It does sound like a lawyer. And he said to the woman, so what if it were true that God said you should not make a habit of eating from any tree in the garden? Statement out of context with implications that were inaccurate. While no doubt, Nakash spellbinding, the notion of our adversary being a serpent is merely symbolic. Satan is a spiritual being, akin to light. His outward appearance is brilliant, radiant, luminous. And while his approach is serpentine and thus convoluted, by virtue of his immortality and enormous energy, he cannot be trifled with, as one would charm a snake. His words are venomous, and his interactions are toxic. In keeping with the metaphor, Satan infects those who listen to him with a neurotoxin, rendering his victims incapable of fleeing, paralyzing, blinding, and incapacitating them. Satan is also a trickster, willing to provide all of the signs and wonders required to promote the poison pens of his apostles. And he can be enchanting, indeed mesmerizing, giving the unsuspecting the impression that he is divine, better even than God. By using a room, we recognize that our adversary is cunning and clever. He appears sensible even while being subtle in truth. Counsel is deliberately ambiguous. Why? Because the truth is devastating to his ego. He's highly skilled at obscuring his actual nature. God told us that. He's very skilled at obscuring his actual nature because Satan doesn't want to be Satan, the adversary. He wants to be God. In light of everything. Yeah, that's been really clear with us. We just haven't thought it through. We ought
Nobody
not
listen.
expect Satan to appear as an ugly reddish avatar with horns. The devil would not fool anyone with such a routine. No, Satan has no interest in playing the role of the adversary. His every ambition, word, appearance, indeed, are carefully calculated to cleverly conceal his adversarial nature such that we humans are seduced by him, tranquilized into believing that he is not only revealing the Word of God, but that he is actually God. Rather than overtly condemn the Torah, for example, rabbis misrepresent and misconstrue its intent in their Talmud. Even their Zohar alludes to the Torah in the process of elevating Satan's appeal. Rather than acknowledge that he had been selected by Satan to undermine Yahweh, Paul claimed that God, the very God that he was contradicting, had chosen him to be his lone apostle. As a result of this clever ruse, Christians would worship Paul's Lord as if Satan were God. They would even identify themselves with the macabre image of the dead God on a stick. Similarly, Muhammad fooled billions when he modeled Allah after Satan and then claimed that he was God. And in the end, all three religions would seek to abuse and silence Yahweh's witness and corrupt his testimony. It was clever. Mm-hmm. The fact is, Yahweh created Hasatan, the adversary. God allowed him to enter heaven. He even introduced him to us, describing him, so that we wouldn't be similarly fooled by this ploy. Then, and this is important, Yahweh allowed Satan to misquote him, thereby mislead humanity. When Christian says, I can't believe that God would allow someone to corrupt his word, just not paying attention.
From the get-go.
Absolutely. From the second chapter of the first book.
Yeah.
He even gave the people he loved the opportunity to choose poorly, to respond in a manner that was hostile to their well-being.
Well, see, that would tell me that if you're not going to go back and read what he said, then you don't have a chance.
No,
I mean, he told you, go read what I say, and now you can't be fooled. He even said the same thing about if the account is true of Yosha telling them his farewell speech, he's telling them, look out for Paul. He's coming. The wolf is coming. The
wolf's coming.
But they never look there. They won't look in the Torah.
Yeah, I mean, Yosha said, they've got a wolf in sheep's clothing that's going to come to you and to try to annul the Torah. Don't believe him. How much clearer can it be? And Yahweh, 666 years before Paul penned Galatians, said that a fellow named Shaul was going to be the plague of death. He's going to be overly fixated with circumcision. He is going to claim Gentiles for himself. He's going to come at the time the Moed are being fulfilled. Went on and explained exactly what he was going to be like, that talked about his ego and his circular reasoning. We managed to ignore it. Hey, you found, before we go, because we're going to start the third chapter of Bereshith here in just a moment, but I know that you had told me you did some checking on the rather unusual claim that I made, that I actually think this is one of the things that we've come up with, that there are some rabbis over the past couple of thousand years that came to realize this is also true. I think you can find it one of it's like 1,000 things we've deduced from Yah's word that no one has considered in 2,000 or 2,500 years. This is one of them that there actually are some rabbinical writings on. Again, my wife found them for me after we came to it. She says, I've read that 1,000, 1,500 years ago, some rabbis that recognized the same thing, that of the Hebrew letters that are directional, all but one points to the left. Hebrew reads from right to left. So all the direction says, go where the words lead. Follow these words to their destination. And the one that goes the wrong way is the Gimel, the basis of Goy. God says, don't follow in the ways of the Goy. He made the foot, that is the Gimel, go in the wrong direction. It's really brilliant. Don't go that way. Go this way. Yeah, go this way.
Yeah.
And you did a little study on it. I know that we don't have unanimity among covenant members. There's, I think Mike is one that says there's a couple of letters that he thinks the plow is going the other way, and one other letter that he doesn't concur with. And it's fine to have thoughtful disagreements. Sure. Mike has endeared himself to me a million times over. He is the world's best fact checker in these books, and is hugely beneficial in his editing process. And he does just a lot of great research. But this just happens to be one of the places where he sent me his thoughts on it, and I don't concur, but I still have the utmost respect for his thought process. I think you have as well, and your views are fairly similar to mine. That there's one letter that's going the wrong direction, all the rest of them are going to the left. Follow where the words lead.
Yeah, and I'll send this to Mike, my little notes here to Mike, and he can see my reasoning on it, and then go from there, because I've got it's about 2 pages. Yeah. But it was an interesting.
Because I don't want anybody to make be mistaken here. Within our covenant family, particularly with the thoughtfulness that someone like Mike displays, we actually encourage disagreement. I think it's a wonderful thing. Listen, we're not going to disagree on Yahweh's name or the nature of the covenant. We don't disagree on anything that is material to Yahweh and our relationship with Him. But there's so many details that are interwoven into this story that there can be different interpretations of things, and we can both be right. Or sometimes, we're wrong, and he may be right. But this is not a bad thing. This is a very good thing. All right, go ahead, Kurt.
Yeah. Oh no, I just what I broke them down to. There was the way I recognize these letters. There's 9 of them that are going from right to left, and one is going to. I'm sorry about my dog. And I have one of them that's going from the left to the right, which is the Gimel. And then I looked at the others, and there's 6 that actually go up and down. And I'm doing little directional lines saying, well, how does the flap work on the Pesach door or the flap on the tent? Because that's what it's drawn as, and it's going up and down. And I started thinking, well, that's kind of like free will, because you can go into the tent and out of the tent. You have a hand, a cough. That can be, you can greet you, or you can push somebody away from it. You can, say stop. You have an eyelid, which is perspective. It can be Yah's perspective or yours, but it goes up and down with lids. It covers the eye, as well as a mouth, the pay that goes up and down as well. Then you have, of course, the teeth that are they go up and down and biting, which are symbolic of nourishment or poisonous food, depending on what the words are. And then, of course, you do have a quaff, which is a sun rising or sun setting. It could be the future you're going to, or the end of your life.
Right. Correct.
So then you've got another 6 left, and the 6 that are left, I broke into 2 threes.
Okay.
Paint here, go.
That's
throwing
okay.
a cookie in him. We have
the artist, of course, has a dog named Paint. I mean, it's yes. We understand the metaphor. Yes.
Yes, and he actually is. He looks like a pinto pony, which is the painted pony as well. So it's really quite involved. So it was a good choice. So
good choice.
So you've got 3 that actually go laterally, in my opinion, and it's just my opinion. You've got those 3, of course, the hay. A hay can walk to the left. It can walk to the right. Right. But it is drawn upright. The mem, which water flows in either direction. It is a wave, but it's not drawn going in any direction. It's just stagnant there, but with the opportunity to move.
It's not stagnant because it's wavy. So with the wave,
it's wavy, but it's not. It's not going in one direction over the other.
Right. It's got energy, but it's not moving right or left. Correct.
That's right. And then you have something. What are you going to do with the tall? If it's it can be two things. I've seen it as it could be another T or X marks the spot, but it's also drawn as a basket. By some people believe it's primarily a basket. Well, anything that's a circle can roll, and it's on its side. It can roll either way. So that gives something that tells me that the letters also I wrote to pertain a little bit to the imperfect because it's ongoing. In whatever direction, it's still ongoing.
But then I'm left with any of those things can move either direction. Like water can provide life, it nourishes plants and provides us with life, but there's probably nothing more destructive in our world. I mean, like when you have a hurricane, it's the water surge that is destructive. Floods are unbelievable.
Yes, floods are awful.
Yes, right.
So that brings us down to three more, and these I didn't have a directional line. I put them as stable, and it's a reason that seemed to be the most logical choice in my mind because you have a chet. A chet is a fence, a protective wall. Right. It could be it could be the fencing part or the wall of a tent, like the sheepskin, but both are protective from storms or attacks. They're both protective, and they also separate.
Yeah, there's no chance that the fence is moving to the right or to the left, but the fence is a barrier. It's either keeping you out or keeping you safe inside.
Safe inside, right.
Right. So there is definitely a direction. It's just not moving to the right or to the left. It is something that is forward and back. You're either protected inside of it or you're on the outside looking in. And prohibited from entry.
Okay, now we're down to two that we need to view and figure out if we want to. And, of course, that's the tent peg, the wah. It increases the size of a tent and also stabilizes a tent. It represents the family. But it's as strong as a stable up and down. Right. That's right.
Right. No tent peg
flops around and you got nothing.
Right.
Yeah.
Got nothing.
And then, of course, the favorite of all, we have an upright pole. It holds up the tent of the witness.
Right.
It is the things, and I categorize these as things that can be trusted and relied upon. Right. It's the positive take on those three words.
Yeah. And all three of those are things that cannot move right or left. Everything else can move right or left, but not that. Those three, they're all stable.
Yeah. All things have movement, but not those. They're stable as can be.
Correct.
You can count on them. So and I'll send a copy over to Mike and see what he thinks and see what he comes up with.
I think the thing was is got a person laying down and their feet is off to the right, the head is to the left. I viewed it as a left leaning because it's
it's leaning
head,
back, but
is leaning back, and so I view it as the head is the operative part. And so his view is, if you're laying back, your eyes are facing to the right. But as I look at it, the person's head is directionally moving is oriented to the left side, and then the plow. The way that I look at that plow, it looks to me like the plow is to be pulled from right to left for it to till the ground, the way the letter is. But again, you can have different opinions on that, and again, those two letters are not among the most important. So the two that were questionable to him don't take away from the overall insights that you can derive from all the others.
Yeah.
Now, you also said that you found, and by the way, the conclusion to me of all of this was that the Hebrew letters direct us to go where the words lead. That was when I started this, that was the overwhelming thought that I had from God. Go where my words lead. If this is not complicated, figure out what I said and go where the words lead. They may lead to places that you just never thought possible. You may not even like initially. That will cause you some heartburn. But trust me on this: if you go to where my words lead, it's gonna turn out good in the end. You're going to be very satisfied. You're going to be enlightened. You're going to see how the whole picture fits together. Just please have the courage to go where my words lead. So when I see these letters leaning from right to left the way that Hebrew reads, that's what struck me about these words, where Yahweh says specifically, don't go in the way of the Goyim. And, of course, the most important G word is Goyim, and they put the opposite side. So that's the meaning that I derive from it and why it worked for me. And if it doesn't work for you, that's okay. But that's an interpretation. So we're not here trying to analyze what God said. We're just looking at the language that he used, the letters, and saying, isn't this an interesting insight that we think can be derived from them? Now, you also looked at some of the numbers and how they relate to Yahweh's name. Now, this one I have never heard before, so I'm going to.
Well, I had never seen it before either, but I was reading and I thought to myself, because to paraphrase something that is in this chapter, you were talking about that if you want to be like Satan, I'm paraphrasing. Be like Satan. Don't use Yahweh's name. And I read that.
You read a little further down here. Satan never uses Yahweh's name. Never. And so we know that we know that rabbinic types are going to change his name. They're going to use Hashem and bury it in so many different ways. But I never even thought about this. This is, and it also kind of helps to prove that Yahweh's pronunciation, or the pronunciation of Yahweh's name is Yahweh. If you do the numbers, if you write numbers in Hebrew, and I'm going by a source here, 1 through 9 are Aleph through Thet, or Tet. Right.
When you get to 10, you have a double-digit number, so now you have to write it, and then you would write Yah Aleph, which would be 10 plus 1. Okay. And if you want to write, you write, that's it. I'm looking at the current modern Hebrew, so when I look at the other way, it makes more sense to me. If you're going to do 20, here's another, or say 23, you would have to write Kaf Gimel. However, you've got two letters, you have two numbers that you can't write. Now, they do that consistently all the way through. 10 plus 1, 10 plus 2, 10 plus 3. They write 11, 12, 13, 14, the same thing with 20, the same thing with all of them. Except all of a sudden you've got two exceptions that they cannot use. And it's the number 15 and the number 16. If you write the number 15, you write Yah.
Oh.
If you write the number 16, you write Yahowah.
Oh.
And that is too close to Yahweh. So they change it to Tet plus for the Wah. Well, for the 15, they change it from Tet Wah, and they write it as for 16. They write it, which is 9 plus 7. They write it Thet Zain.
Isn't that interesting?
You got to work real hard. You got to work hard to get rid of Yahweh's name.
Wow, they are really that insistent.
Yeah.
Hiding Yahweh's name.
Yah, and you can't even accidentally fall on it.
They are really devious.
You ain't kidding.
Obviously, there was a rabbinic Jew somewhere back there that thought this through and said, we...
Whoa, wait, stop this.
We can't have 1 and 6. We're going to... or 1 and 5, we're going to have 9 and 6. Just to avoid saying Yah. And Yahweh, which is... so many of the names, like Yashayah is really Yashayahu. Yirmiyah is Yirmayahu. There's so many names that have the Yah and the Wah at the that they will do anything to keep you from knowing.
That just blows me away. I mean, my God, you people that hung up.
That's really clever. I was unaware of that. All right, we've got a few minutes left. Let's start into. Thank you for that, Kirk. Let's start into Ba'arif 3:1. So that is considerably divergent from the statement that this statement that Yah makes. Let me read this to you. But God did not leave His creation equipped. He provided clear instructions. And said, keep in mind, this is now Yahweh's instruction. We read it earlier, but just so that it's fresh in our mind. Then Yahweh Almighty provided clear instruction and direction on behalf of Adam, saying, from every tree in the garden you can continually and actually eat, enthusiastically fed and nurtured. But from the tree of the knowledge of good and that which is beneficial and productive and bad, undesirable, don't make a habit of continuing to eat from it. Because as a consequence, in a day you will die defined by having eaten from it. So, that's God's statement. It is considerably divergent from the statement Satan attributed to Yahweh. In academic circles, this ploy is called revisionist history. In debate, it is called a straw man. The adversary's whitewash of Yahweh's word was a clever corruption, or a counterfeit, if you will, which is the most effective way to convince people that a fraud is true. Then Satan said to the woman, so what if it were true that God said you should not make a habit of eating from any tree of the garden? Well, think of how different that is. You should not make a habit of eating from any tree of the garden. What God said is you can make a habit of eating from every tree in the garden, didn't He?
Yes.
So what Satan says, so what if God said, and then He did as He inspired Paul to do, which was to imply with a focused citation the opposite of what God said. Rather than God restricting them and saying, you can't eat from every tree in the garden, God says you can eat from every tree in the garden. That's the first statement. You can continually eat from every tree in the garden. But Satan's promise was, so what if God said you should not eat
question, though. What if?
Of any tree of the garden? His comment was the antithesis of what God said. But there were so many words in common that the counterfeit was suddenly credible. He didn't come into the garden and say, hey, I have conceived the most spectacular tree in the history of
fruit trees.
I have a fruit. I've invented the Apple computer. You aren't going to believe what this sucker will do for you. That's what I have invented. And if you take advantage of my invitation, well, you are going to find life so much richer. That would be invented, wouldn't it? He said, I invented this thing. I'm offering you this thing. My thing is better than God's thing. But that's not what Paul wrote.
Though.
That's not what Satan said. Satan instead grew his credibility by misquoting God, by coming up with a line that was similar in every way except it was negated. One small difference, otherwise it was exactly the same, but he's inferring the exact opposite. So Satan is gaining all of his credibility by usurping Yah's testimony. That's the opposite of creating an alternative from whole cloth. That's what Paul did. Paul is saying, hey, it's the God. He's the one, man. He's the one that authorized me. And then every time that Paul wants legitimacy, he turns to the Torah and misquotes it.
Amazing.
An exceedingly important aspect of religions, particularly Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. Now, in actuality, Adam was told from every tree of the garden, you can continually and actually eat. There were no restrictions placed on Adam. He could eat whatever he desired and saw fit. Moreover, had there been a restriction, the negation was not on eating from any tree, as Satan misrepresented. There was simply a deadly, read venomous and toxic, consequence of being defined by ingesting something invalid and disagreeable. There were no restrictions, just beneficial results and negative consequences in the options that were before them. And this was not an, if you make one mistake, I'm going to kill you scenario. A call, eating, was spoken in the imperfect, which describes ongoing and habitual behaviors. This was parental advice, not a Lord's command. Now, Satan inferred that he, knew something beyond all of this, even more than this, which is to infer that his knowledge was superior to God's. But in actuality, Satan's approach was in contrast with God's. He was the other hand, the nevertheless, upon which this exception, this new condition, was being hoisted. Born off out of anger, arrogance, and resentment, Satan would inappropriately emphasize that his self-appraisal was indeed accurate when it was as phony as Paul's epistles, Akiva's arguments, and Muhammad's recitals. Now, no one's going to be fooled by a red $6 bill with a picture of a hideous spiked-tailed, horned devil and pitchfork. Yeah, although most people don't have a problem. In God We Trust inscribed on a promissory note, by the way, makes it a debt instrument, depicting a sun god religion by way of an Egyptian pyramid and the eye of Horus. Well, maybe people would be fooled by a $6 bill with a spike-tailed horned devil. The thing we want to keep in mind is the closer the lie is to the truth, the more deceptive and beguiling it becomes. A counterfeit bill remains fraudulent and illegal, even when it is 99.99% consistent with the original article. It artificially gains credibility in the eyes of the unwary through feigned similarity, but keeps Christians tied up in their underwear. Created without the capacity for free will, Satan is devoid of creativity. His lone ploy is to beguile by concealing, corrupting, or counterfeiting something God has already conveyed. And that is why the Lord's most popular religions are twisted variations of the truth. The more they claim the Torah for themselves, as do Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, the greater their appeal. The more they misappropriate and misapply the Word of God, the more readily they are believed. Now, should you be wondering how Satan could have rebelled if he did not have free will, this is something I would encourage everyone to consider. Specifically, the circumstances under which we have the capacity to choose without the right to do so. The most obvious example is the military. Command and control institution. Same as Yahweh's Shabbat of Malach, the regime of spiritual implements, where soldiers do not have the freedom to refuse an order. That was the case with Satan. Insubordination in the military is unacceptable, and it is severely punished, with the non-compliant stripped of their rank and then incarcerated. People have long chosen to be pedophiles, to be rapists, to be arsonists, to be thieves and murderers, but they've never had the right to do so. Yahweh gave Adam and Chava, and indeed all men and women, free will. We can choose to ignore Yahweh's instructions without penalty. And those who do, like all animals, eventually die, souls ceasing to exist. God neither punishes nor pursues them, doesn't judge them. He most assuredly doesn't incarcerate them in Sheol. That was the cause and consequence of the instruction to Adam regarding the tree of knowledge. If you eat from it, you're going to embody what it means to die. Not going to punish you. In fact, the things that Yahweh says, these are the consequence of you doing that, and he gives each of the three, they're not punishments. Not at all. Just a consequence. You do this, this is the consequence. You make your choice, you live with the consequences. The Malach messengers, however, in Yahweh Shabbat, exist as spiritual envoys. They are God's implements, tools. He chooses to interact with his creation using. It's like a potter's wheel. Doesn't have a life of its own. The potter's wheel does not decide when to run or what to make. And most importantly, the potter's wheel would be considered broken should it become insubordinate, or worse, claim superiority over the one wielding it. Now, moving on to the second element of the adversary's plot to mislead Towrah, he said, so what if God said? His inference, pretty ballsy, huh? But when listen, I've been, I spent the last month in Pauline Christianity, and that's the epitome of it. So what if God said? But Paul said. His inference was, of course, that Yahweh's words do not matter. No. The interesting thing is that Satan is far more respectful of God than was Paul. Paul calls Yahweh's testimony pornography. Yeah. He calls God a mean-spirited, antiquated slave master. He says that God's words can't save anyone. That, in fact, when he has his Christo dying, his Christo does not die to save us from sin. No. His Christo dies to save us from the Torah. Paul is so much more disrespectful of God in his Torah than Satan. That's part of why Satan probably had to possess him to say, hey, boy, hey. Okay, neither of us like God, but after all, he is God. Chill. Take a chill pill here, pal. Yeah.
Good point.
The ploy forms the basis, of course, of Catholicism's condemnation of those who were sola scriptura. Popes consider themselves authorized to alter, even completely change, God's directions. It is the basis of the oral law, where the claim is that G-D handed the written Torah to Moses while the people created their own oral variation. In socialist secular humanism, man claims that God never existed, making mankind the ultimate authority and thereby rendering Yahweh's message moot. In Islam, Allah was modeled after Satan. So everything Yahweh said was completely contradicted. Rabbis were especially cunning, openly claiming Yah's authority for themselves by outvoting and overshouting God. It has become a popular appeal. So what if God set the Shabbat apart? We want Friday or Sunday or the weekend, as the case may be. So what if God invited us to observe the 7 Mikra? We prefer Easter, Ramadan, Hanukkah, May Day. So what if God chose the name Yahweh? We prefer Mother Nature, evolution, Hashem, Allah, Jesus, Jehovah, Buddha, or the Lord. As you travel along life's way, and you confront a tradition or teaching that is somehow attributed to God, ask yourself, has God said this? That was the issue. When I confronted baptismo, or baptizo, in Paul's letter, first time, of course, it's written anywhere in Christendom, what was my first response? Did God say this? Did God say this? Is there any place that Paul could claim God said this? Paul's spectacular at misquoting God. But when it came to baptism, he didn't even make the attempt. Why? Because there's nothing related to it that he could twist.
That's very interesting.
Ask yourself, has God said this? Or as the case with the Talmud, New Testament, and Quran, is what is being claimed a corruption or counterfeit of something God actually stated? In the process of fooling Yahowah, Satan exposed a test that we can all use to avoid being fooled ourselves. Yeah, Kirk, that's probably a good spot for us to take a break from today's program, and we'll pick right up with this next week. I will tell you that, and you, I'm sure, have now read this chapter. There's a lot in this chapter. There's so much that I had never seen before that all of a sudden just appeared so obvious, so insight, and some things that are just shocking. Things that I learned about Yahowah and Adam. Even here, as we're talking about Hasatan, there's some insights that are laid out right for us that are so useful and valuable and insightful, and God's interaction with them. Even things that, if you read a Bible and you say, the penalty for Eve was pain in childbirth. It doesn't say that at all. As a matter of fact, that exact same consequence, the exact same words, are applied to Adam. And last time I checked, Adam's not having babies.
No.
So it can't be pain of childbirth if the same exact verb is used in reference to a consequence from Adam. No, you find out, what God's saying is raising children. That's going to be hard. You think you know what it's like to do something difficult? Well, I'm going to tell you the most difficult thing you ever dreamed of was raising kids. Oh boy, is that ever true? So says, listen, I'm raising you guys. I want you to know what it's like.
Yeah, so here, touche.
Turnabout is fair play. It's just fascinating. So we're going to learn a lot. We're going to also learn a lot about the names that Yahowah chose for her two sons.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What those names mean, what the implications are. Wow. And that's even nothing until we get to Abraham. Oh, my goodness.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, Abraham.
Stories that God tells us about Abraham. And you have to say, why is he telling us this? Why do we all ignore it?
Yeah.
Because it's horrible. I mean, it's really, really horrible. Why is God telling us this? Because clearly, by the end, Abraham and Yahowah, they're father and son, really. They're besties. They are, God says, I made these promises to Abraham, and here 4,000 years later, he's honoring them. And he even introduces himself, I'm the God of Abraham.
Yeah.
So Abraham got it together, even though he was rotten. I mean, and so it's, again, I was saying, listen, the people that I choose to work for, or choose to work with, I'm sorry, they
ain't no prize.
Wow, they ain't no prize. They got nothing to brag about. I'm telling you, the closest person to have something to brag about was probably Doe. And yet, he was kept in check because he had his issues.
He had his moment, didn't he?
But
his moment.
Yeah, that's one of the things. The people that aspire to be the center of God's will and to be used by God, I don't think they understand that unless you are really deeply flawed, you aren't working with God.
Yeah,
it's just that's his thing. It's he wants to show, and there's so much value in it where you can say, listen, God's not looking for you to impress him. You can't do anything that's going to impress him. And he's really far more interested in showing how his Torah plan can perfect the imperfect. That's what he's about doing. He's about taking flawed implements and making them beautiful, making them shine, getting something out of that's useful out of, productive out of a dirty, dented tool.
Dirt. Yeah,
right.
We made out of dirt, so it's good.
The name, the title that he uses to define the work that we're doing, Choder. It's an insignificant stick.
Stick.
You know? And if you don't like being called an insignificant stick, you ought not sign up. Right? So
yeah.
It is it's the beauty of the whole thing. You can and it gives you also a sense that you can relax because you're not doing this because you were super good or super smart or somehow proved yourself worthy and you've got to live up to a standard. No. The standard is really low. And anything that you come up with is a plus.
You inspire all your employees this way too.
Yeah. I rather like it. You can relax. Yeah, that's right. I got really good news for you. Well, maybe it's not so good news. You were chosen by God. Why did he pick me? Because you are really flawed. Okay. Because you weren't a scholar, because you weren't impressive in any way. Was there anything else? Well, yeah, you were willing to listen. You were willing to go where the words lead. Well, okay.
Wait a minute.
That's pretty big. No, not really. He is God, and his words are really smart. So, how big a deal is it really to listen to him and go where his words lead? Yeah. I mean, you're not talking about the village idiot. He is God. He created the universe. He authored life. It really oughtn't to be that impressive that you're willing to listen to him, right? It ought to be our privilege.
Yes.
To listen to him.
Yeah.
Not an accolade. And to go where his words lead, well, why not? He happens to be God.
Compared to what?
Well, yeah. Well, whose else's words would you follow?
That's right.
Yeah. So, but that's why it's I'm very comfortable in saying God is my buddy. We're friends. He's okay. So he's infinitely greater and smarter and better and more powerful than you and I are. But that's not how he approaches us. That's not how he interacts with us. He's very approachable and likable and enjoyable to be around. And you don't cop an attitude because we got nothing to brag about. But you can still be exceedingly relaxed with it. You goof, you just laugh it off, and you say, "Okay, well, do better next time." It's a marvelous way that he had, and even Adam, old Adam. I mean, he dishes responsibility with the best of them. No, it wasn't my fault. It was that woman you gave me. It's your fault. You gave me. It's not even the woman's fault. It's your fault, God. You gave me the woman, and she told me to eat it. So, God, it's your fault. You didn't give me the woman, we wouldn't have this problem. So it's not the best answer that he ever could have given. And of course, the woman said, "Not my fault. You let that serpent into the garden, and he told me I could eat it." No one wants. It's just really interesting how nobody wants to go where the words lead. No one wants to take responsibility. And life turns out better when you go where the words lead. All right, Kirk. Well, it's always fun. I enjoyed your research on the numbers. That's hilarious. And the letters and contributions. We look forward to being with you next week. Shabbat shalom.